In the dusty outskirts of a forgotten farming town, a man who had long made peace with loneliness found his world turned upside down. Silas Romero lived by routine, by silence, and by the ghosts he never dared to chase away. But one night, a strange sound in his barn led him to something he could never have prepared for. A woman unconscious on the ground and 7 frightened children hiding in the shadows behind her. He asked no questions. He offered no judgment. Just food, warmth, and shelter. He didn't know their names. He didn't know their past. But by letting them stay, Silas unknowingly opened the door to something much deeper, something that would test his heart, challenge his town, and change the course of all their lives forever. Silas Romero didn't live for company. On most days, he barely lived for himself. The mornings came and went in silence. Coffee, feed, patchwork repairs on a house that leaned like it wanted to fall. After his wife passed 3 winters ago, the land got quiet in ways that even the birds respected. He didn't complain. Silence was better than pity. He rose before the sun, worked until it dipped again, and only spoke when the mule got stubborn. That was enough. So when he heard the noise coming from the old storage barn behind the chicken coops, something too heavy for a raccoon, too deliberate for wind, he stopped mid-step, instinct stiffening his back. He didn't run. Silas never ran. He grabbed the rusted iron bar from beside the door and moved slow, each step measured like he was walking into someone else's memory. The door creaked open, but not from him. Someone inside had moved. A small shuffle, then nothing. He pushed the door with his boot and stepped in. There, in the faint light slipping through the cracks, he saw her. A woman, curled against a bale of hay like her body had folded in on itself. Her face was bruised, dry with dust. Her dress was torn at the sleeve and her hands clutched something invisible. Behind her, barely visible, were children. 1, then 2, then 5 more. 7 in total, huddled behind crates and sacks like ghosts hoping not to be seen. All of them barefoot, all of them silent. The oldest girl, maybe 10, stood in front of the others, arms out like a shield. Silas didn't speak. He didn't lift the bar. He didn't ask a single question. He crouched beside the woman first. Her lips were cracked, skin hot, fever. He took off his coat and laid it over her, then turned to the children. "Come inside," he said. "It's warmer there." No one moved, so he walked back toward the house and left the door open. A few minutes passed. Then the girl moved. Then the others. They followed him like shadows that had decided just for today not to disappear. Inside, he warmed beans and tore bread into pieces. He didn't watch them eat, didn't ask their names. He fetched a bucket of water and left it near the hearth. One of the boys, hair like straw, drank first, then helped the youngest girl. Silas sat in his chair, back turned, pretending to read a book he'd already forgotten. The woman didn't wake, but her breathing slowed, calmed. The children laid there, heads on the wooden floor, one by one, like they'd done this before, slept in stranger places, with stranger fates. That night, Silas didn't lock the door. He didn't move the rifle closer to his bed. He simply lay there, listening to the faint sound of breathing from the next room. He didn't know where they'd come from. He didn't know what had chased them. He only knew they had stopped running here. And for the first time in a long while, the silence in the house felt different. Not empty, but full of questions he wasn't ready to ask. By the second morning, the house had changed. Not by decoration or smell, but by rhythm. Silas noticed it when he woke to the sound of soft footsteps, not rushed or panicked, but purposeful. He didn't get up right away. He listened. The fire had already been rekindled. Water was boiling somewhere in the back. A broom scratched faintly against the wooden floor. When he finally entered the kitchen, the woman was there, her face still pale, one side swollen, but her hands steady. She didn't look up. She was washing the tin plates like it was her house, like she had always been there. He didn't say anything, just poured coffee into a second cup and set it on the table between them. The children were already outside, 2 gathering sticks, one trying to mend a torn shoe with twine. The older girl had lined up 3 rocks in a neat row, pretending it was a market stall. They hadn't asked for toys. They hadn't asked for anything. Silas stood by the door and watched them for a while. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was movement, breath. The boy with the straw-colored hair tried to carry a bucket that was too heavy. The girl next to him helped without being asked. No complaints, no fighting, just motion. It was the kind of thing Silas hadn't known he missed until it returned. Amara, that was her name. She told him quietly as she folded a blanket near the fire. She didn't offer a last name. Silas didn't ask for one. She didn't speak of where they'd come from or what had happened. But she moved through the house with familiarity, setting things back where they belonged, stitching holes in the curtains, brushing dust off shelves that hadn't mattered in years. She didn't impose, but she didn't apologize either. The children followed her like shadows, doing small chores without being told. One by one, they earned the right to move freely in a place that had never been theirs. And slowly, the house became something different. Not warm, not yet, but less cold. Then came the whispers. First at the grain store. Someone asked why Silas was buying more flour than usual. Then at the church where Miss Delia said she'd seen a dark-haired woman hanging clothes on Silas Romero's line. The baker's wife asked if he was courting again, and someone else said no, she looked too thin for that. Within days, the town had reached its conclusion. A woman with 7 children had taken up space on a widower's land. Uninvited, unapproved. There were no accusations, just tilted heads and tight smiles, the kind that cut deeper than curses. Silas didn't respond. He never had much use for gossip, but he saw the shift. The way neighbors stopped at the edge of his fence, not stepping in. The way hands paused over handshakes. Respect hadn't left, but it had gone quiet. Amara noticed it too. She said nothing, but Silas could see it in the way she held herself tighter when they went into town for supplies. How she stepped back behind the children, as if their presence might shield her. The children felt it as well. The younger ones grew clingier in public. The oldest girl stopped smiling when strangers were near. Still, none of them spoke of leaving. That silence was its own declaration. The house, for all its creaking walls and dry soil, had become their safest ground. Silas didn't know when it had happened, only that he now expected to see them when he woke, and missed the sound of feet when they were gone. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Silas came back from the fields and found the children sitting in a circle, threading beads from old buttons and broken trinkets. Amara stood at the door watching them, her face unreadable. He nodded toward the scene. "They're making bracelets?" She nodded. "They said it's for luck, that if they each wear one, no one will take them away again." Silas didn't reply. Instead, he sat down beside the circle, picked up a string and joined them. No questions, no expectations, just small hands, weathered fingers, and shared silence. And in that quiet, something was built. Not love, not yet, but trust. And trust, Silas knew, was harder to earn and stronger to hold than anything else. He arrived on horseback, unannounced, the kind of man who made his presence known long before he dismounted. Silas was fixing the gate when he saw him. Tall, sunburned, sharp eyes hidden behind the shadow of a wide black hat. His shirt was too clean for a traveler, his boots too polished for a man who worked the land. When he finally spoke, his voice carried that kind of forced politeness that came before a threat. "Looking for a woman," he said. "Amara. Might be calling herself something else now." Silas didn't flinch. He leaned on the gatepost, wiped the sweat from his brow, and said, "Nothing." The man introduced himself as Mateo Sa, owner of a transport company 2 towns south. Said Amara used to work for him, managing inventory, keeping the books. Claimed she left in the night, taking coin and documents she had no right to touch. Claimed she corrupted her own sisters. Children. 7 of them, he said, dragged into God knows what by her. His tone turned sharper the longer Silas stayed silent. "She's not right," he insisted. "You don't know what you let into your house." At that, Silas finally raised his eyes. "You're right," he said evenly. "I don't, but I do. Though she doesn't speak like a thief, and those children don't look at her like she's a curse." Mateo demanded to see her. Said he'd take her with or without help. Silas shook his head once. You want to talk to her? You'll do it here. You lay a hand on anyone, and you'll leave with less than you came with. No shouting, no threats, just quiet certainty. Amara stepped out from behind the door, then the children closed behind. Her face was steady, but her eyes held the weight of old fear. Mateo's eyes lit up, equal parts triumph and cruelty. You think hiding here changes what you did? He hissed. You're still what you've always been, a curse to anyone fool enough to take you in. Before Amara could speak, the eldest girl stepped forward. Her arms trembled, but her voice didn't. She didn't steal. She saved us. From you. The others gathered behind her, standing shoulder to shoulder. Like a small wall made of willpower and defiance. The boy with the crooked tooth added, She worked. You just never paid her. Amara reached out to stop them, but it was too late. The truth had already been spoken, not in adult words, but in the way children stood for someone who had never left them behind. Mateo sneered. You got them trained like dogs. You think this means something? Silas took one step forward. That was enough. Mateo looked at Silas, at the steadiness in his stance, at the 7 children now lined up like a jury he didn't expect. He spat to the side. She's not worth it, he muttered. You'll learn that too. Then he turned and walked away, not fast enough to seem scared, but too fast to pretend he'd won. No one spoke until the sound of hooves faded. Amara sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. Silas didn't say anything. He just sat beside her. The children began to move again, quietly at first. One brought her water. Another draped a shawl over her shoulders. No one cried, not even her. But something had broken, and something else had begun to heal. That night, the house didn't feel like it had survived a storm. It felt like it had passed a test. Not of strength, but of loyalty. Amara didn't sleep much, but she didn't stare at the ceiling like she had before. The children didn't ask what would happen next. They already knew. The danger had come, looked them in the face, and left without taking anything. Silas didn't check the door twice before. He just looked at the empty chair across the table and felt, for the first time, like it truly belonged to someone again. Someone who chose to stay, even when her past tried to drag her back. It started with the schoolteacher. Miss Inez Tejada had taught half the town how to read, and the other half how to behave. She didn't care for gossip, and she cared even less for people who threw stones while hiding behind their prayers. One afternoon, she showed up at Silas's gate with a stack of hand-me-down readers and a small blackboard balanced under her arm. If those children are staying, she said, they might as well not grow up ignorant. She didn't wait for permission. She walked into the house, sat down at the kitchen table, and told the children to take a seat. Only 3 of them could recognize letters. That didn't bother her. Everyone starts somewhere, she said, even me. The news spread fast, not the kind of gossip soaked in poison, but something quieter, like doubt. If Miss Tejada saw worth in those children, maybe others had misjudged. A few days later, the butcher wrapped 2 extra cuts of meat in brown paper and sent them by accident. Then the widow Gomez left a jar of jam on the porch. No notes, no explanations, but the gestures stacked up, and slowly, so did the trust. Amara never asked for any of it. She just accepted with grace, nods, smiles, a soft thank you when appropriate. Silas noticed how she stood a little straighter, how the children's laughter became less cautious. It didn't happen overnight, but it happened. The children changed first. They no longer clung to corners or paused before entering a room. They played louder. They disagreed with each other, safely. The middle girl, Eva, started braiding the hair of the younger ones every morning without being told. The eldest, Clara, helped Miss Tejada with the younger kids' lessons, and even corrected Silas's spelling once, which earned her a rare smile. These weren't acts of discipline. They were signs of belonging. The house was no longer just shelter. It was their world now. A world with rules, routine, and room to be themselves. Still, not everyone was convinced. At church, whispers persisted. Some questioned Amara's past. Others wondered about Silas's judgment. One Sunday after the sermon, An older woman named Lydia Pina approached Amara outside. She didn't offer pleasantries. "What's your sin?" she asked plainly. Amara didn't flinch. "Surviving," she replied, "and making sure they did too." Lydia didn't speak again, but the next day her grandson arrived with a broken boot and asked Silas if he could learn to fix leather. Silas said yes. That boy returned the next week with a friend. The fences began to fall, not with grand gestures, but with ordinary requests that meant everything. Amara continued doing what she had always done: quiet work. She cleaned, taught, mended. She never defended herself, never raised her voice, but her presence became something more than tolerated. It became needed. People began to notice that their children came home speaking of Miss Amara with respect, that their boys followed Silas's example more closely, that their girls wanted to learn to read too. No one admitted they had misjudged. They didn't need to. They showed it in pie slices sent wrapped in cloth, in borrowed tools returned with notes, in standing a little longer at the gate before walking away. Weeks later, Miss Tejada returned with a sack of grain and a half-dozen pencils. She lingered on the porch after her lessons, watching the children chase each other through the field. "They're not afraid anymore," she said. Amara nodded. "Neither am I." That night, the family sat around the table, eating bread baked by a neighbor who once crossed the street to avoid them. There were no toasts, no announcements. But something had shifted. The town still watched, but no longer with suspicion. Now it watched with curiosity, and for the first time, with quiet hope. The dress wasn't meant to change anything. Silas had kept it folded in a cedar box for nearly a decade, untouched, tucked beneath layers of yellowing letters and one photograph he couldn't bring himself to burn. It wasn't lace or silk, just cotton, faded blue with a line of hand embroidery along the sleeves. Marta had sewn it herself the year before she died. It wasn't for mourning. It was for spring. Silas had forgotten it was even there until one of the younger girls, while cleaning the back room, asked who the box belonged to. He hadn't answered then. But later that evening, as the children played outside and Amara folded laundry, he brought it to her, wrapped in silence. She looked at the bundle, then at him. He didn't say her name, just held it out, unsure if it was a gift or an apology. Amara took it gently, as if it might vanish in her hands. She unfolded it slowly, fingers brushing over the seams. "Was it hers?" she asked. Silas nodded once. "You don't have to wear it," he added quickly. But she didn't answer. Instead, she carried it to her room and closed the door. The children noticed. They fell silent, gathering near the hallway. A moment passed, then two. When she stepped back out, the dress fit like it had been waiting for her all this time. Not perfectly, but with purpose. The oldest child smiled first. Then another said, "You look like you belong." Amara didn't speak. She just sat among them, as if the chair had always been hers. Later that night, she asked for a piece of paper. Silas handed her one without question. She sat at the table, pen in hand, and wrote a single word across the top. Isadora. That was the name she said aloud when Clara asked what it meant. "It's mine," she said simply. "The one I choose." It wasn't her given name. It wasn't from a birth certificate or an old memory. It was new, like roots pressing into soil that finally allowed growth. The children practiced saying it, giggling at first, then repeating it with more certainty each time. Silas said it only once, softly, while refilling her tea. "Isadora." She looked up and met his eyes, not startled, not shy, just present. The days that followed moved like breath. The house didn't feel different, but it behaved like something steadier. Meals had a rhythm. Chores turned into routine. The children began referring to the bedrooms as ours. Even the littlest one started, calling the porch home. And while Silas still spoke little, he began listening more carefully. He watched how Isadora tied her hair differently now, how she held herself with less weight. He noticed the way she hummed when cooking, how the children sat closer to her during storms. There was no declaration, no ceremony, but it was clear. They had chosen this place and it had chosen them back. One evening, as the fire crackled low and the children dozed in a tangle of limbs and dreams, Silas sat across from her at the table. They didn't talk often at night, but this time she broke the silence. "If you asked," she said, not lifting her eyes, "I'd stay." He looked at her, hands still, breath caught somewhere between his ribs and his heart. "I don't want to ask anything you don't want to give," he said. She smiled then. Tired, real, the kind that comes only after surviving something. "Hard. You already did," she whispered. "You just didn't know it." That night, he folded the box and put it away for good, not because he was forgetting the past, but because he had stopped needing to hold on to it. And when he passed by the bedroom where the children lay curled around Isadora, he didn't pause or turn away. He simply walked on, knowing she was no longer temporary. She had chosen her name. She had chosen the dress. And now, without asking, she had chosen him too. They didn't send invitations. No one expected decorations or dancing, and that was never the point. Silas had asked, not with a ring or a grand gesture, but with a quiet conversation over breakfast. "Would you want it to be official?" he had asked. Isadora didn't need time to think. "Yes," she said, like the answer had been waiting inside her for years. There was no dressmaker involved, no preacher from out of town. Miss Inez Tejada, with her clear voice and even steadier judgment, offered to officiate. "It won't be legal in some books," she warned, "but it'll be true in the ones that matter." That was enough for both of them. The ceremony took place in the barn, not because of nostalgia, but because it was where it all began. The same wooden beams, the same straw-swept floor. Only this time, it held something different. Isadora wore the same faded blue dress. Clara helped stitch new thread into the hem that morning, tiny yellow flowers curling along the edge. Silas wore his cleanest shirt and a pair of boots polished by the youngest boy, who grinned every time someone complimented them. The children stood in a row, fidgeting but proud, eyes wide with the kind of joy that had taken months to grow. Neighbors came too, not in droves but in pairs. Lydia Peña brought a loaf of sweet bread. The butcher's wife held back tears. No one spoke loudly, no one interrupted. They just watched and listened and stood. After the short exchange of words, Isadora stepped aside and knelt in the dirt near a small corner of the yard. In her hands was a square of white fabric, what remained of the dress she had worn the day Silas found her in the barn, torn, stained, and folded tight. She placed it in the shallow hole Clara had dug earlier that morning. Silas stood beside her and poured a handful of soil over it. No one clapped, no one cheered. It wasn't an ending. It was a burial of fear, of what came before, a silent promise between them. This is where it stays. What grows from here will be new. Over the next days, the children began calling her Mama. It happened naturally, one after the other, like a ripple across still water. No one corrected them, not even Isadora. She started writing her new name on things, inside the front cover of books, on labels she stitched into their clothes. Silas didn't speak more than he used to, but he watched more closely. He began teaching the older boys how to care for the livestock, how to fix a fence properly, how to plant rows that could feed more than just themselves. The girls helped Isadora make soap in bulk, hung laundry with precision, even began keeping records of food and supplies. They were learning to run something that mattered, together. The community no longer whispered. They nodded when they passed. They waved. Some even stopped by to ask advice about land or children, or how to keep hens from killing each other. Miss Tejada continued her lessons, not just with the children but sometimes with neighbors who had never learned to read. Isadora's past wasn't forgotten, but it was no longer feared. People accepted that pain had shaped her, but it hadn't defined her. What defined her now was resilience, grace, and the way she turned a quiet house into a place of meaning. And Silas, he didn't need to say anything, to be understood. His silence was no longer empty. It was full. One evening, long after the sun had gone down, Silas sat outside with the children, the youngest asleep in his lap. Isadora stood nearby, arms crossed loosely, smiling as she listened to Clara read aloud from one of Miss Tejada's books. The barn behind them was just a barn now, nothing more. But under the soil, near its edge, the flowers had begun to grow, small, stubborn, yellow and blue. Isadora looked at Silas. "Do you think they'll remember all this?" she asked quietly. He looked out at the children, then back at her and replied, "The children will remember." She nodded. And so they would. The children will remember. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Souls of the Old West. Leave a like, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Here, we honor stories that time almost forgot.